do it. I'm going to probably have a couple more hours of being functional today. But anyway, good. So I had a few pieces to, I had a couple of, one piece to finish at the end of this thing here, and I'm worried that it won't work. Okay, so we got to this little bit of, moving on from biological contagion into social contagion. And one thing I wanted to add about these big epidemic models, which, I'm pointing to a huge industry, a huge undertaking by the groups to do it. And again, Vespaniani's group at Northeastern, I think, is sort of the premier one, is that even those models, people aren't putting economy into it, right? There's just nothing about that. So there are toy models, which are fine, and they tell us big stories, but they've been used way beyond their scope. I mean, it's just absolutely mind-blowing that keeps going on. But even these really sophisticated population models, there's nothing about economy in them. And I mean, that's ridiculously hard to model. But in terms of making huge decisions about what population should do, we don't really have the full story. So, I mean, in some ways, what you have to do is it has to go somewhat by feel, and you have to look at counts. If you're running this ship, basically, and kind of give advice, and you figure out that masks work, and you tell people that, you figure out how to communicate that well, right? Because that was just a huge mess. That's specific to this time, right? Maybe some other times we have to, cover our ears or something like that. Okay, so we got to this bit, and there was a couple of little pieces at the end that I just wanted to add. So this is another use of SIR type models. This is just about the language, right? Rethinking the metaphor. I'll put that one up. But these are just some extra ones. This one this is from 2014. A little, I should say available. But Facebook will lose 80% of its users by 2017, right? And Guardian, this is a Guardian article. Obviously, this is a story that got picked up. So in terms of social contagion, pretty good, right? People were pretty excited about this one. And it was just on the archive. I don't think it got any further than that because they used an SIR model and they just tried to kind of fit a curve that's going to go down at some point. Facebook, this is Lado Adamic, sort of a famous person, one of the famous people in early networks. So this is number of Princeton publications, and this is they're using the same model. This is where it will go. So that was just like a blog post to kind of fight back. But I'm just saying there are really crazy things that people, persist in doing with these simple models that are just way beyond their scope, right? They tell us stories about systems that are really important, like a epidemic threshold, and that's important to know. But then you have to get to, we're actually running a ship, and it's the same sort of thing with telling a baseball pitcher this is how you should pitch because I did a simulation over here and whatever, and they're like, well, or cricket, where the Pakistanis in the 80s discovered that if you slobber on one side of the ball, it swings the other way, So, that wasn't in anyone's fluid dynamics thing. All right, a little bit at the end. So I have a couple more pieces to add in here about COVID, which I just wanted to put in here. So there's flattening the curve, right? This is a big story early on. This was, something of some complexity perhaps to try to communicate to a general public. So, but it was, right, so there were pictures like this, it could be like this, and sort of there'd be this idea that this is time, number of people in hospitals, right? Number of people here, and then, if we could make it go like this, even though the same number get infected, we're not at least going to get into this disaster where people who've got a broken leg die because they can't get into an ICU, right? So that seemed to be a story you could communicate. It was really about this kind of threshold, I think. But I just want to point out that there are a couple other pieces. I guess I've come up with four, but testing was terrible early on, right? And it was just like we were sort of imploring the world to, get testing out. And of course, there was disinformation about that, I still see that being talked about online, even say for Vermont, that more tests mean more cases and it's all, which of course is somewhat true, but it led to a disinformation thing. Anyway, so we've got more time to kind of develop a response structure. And if we have to build more hospitals, I mean, COVID-19, pretty bad, but it's certainly not the worst pandemic we've ever had, and it won't be the worst one we'll ever have, unfortunately. Of course, developing vaccines is a huge thing, which was a bit of an unknown. I mean, there was a sense maybe 18 months to 2 years was sort of a time frame floated around. There was definitely a sense we would make them, right? We would figure it out. And indeed, many, a number of different groups have, sort of solved that. There are different solutions. So that's promising. This fits back into the Moore's law and Wright's law stuff from the very early slides on scaling about the speed up of technology or speed up of industries, right? So the time between development of things, whether it's planes or, improvised explosive devices. I mean, there's all sorts of pieces here. Shrinks, the cost goes down, all these pieces. So the idea that vaccine development would take, shorter and shorter time scales, and perhaps, we'll get to a point where we can make them in a week or whatever, right? Because we sufficiently understand these things. But this is the other big piece I don't think that was talked about so much, was limiting the virus's ability to, or opportunity to mutate. It just wasn't really talked about. And of course, we got there, right? So we got to there's a ton of mutations, obviously, that went the other way. We never see them, right? We'll talk about success after the break of things in general. So we don't really, track them or think about them, but the one, so the Delta variant has been spreading tremendously. All right. Okay, so just a few more pieces on sort of thoughts from this time. So, and then I'll start talking about social contagion. But it's all entwined. It's a big, big mess. Okay. So I've given you this one, right? It's a conspiracy, right? It is to touch. But the piece to get in, it's not, it's not to touch, it's really to breathe. So yes, so this is very endangering to say this, but this is rather remarkable, right? And just to repeat again, May 2021 is when WHO said, oh, by the way, it's airborne, probably shouldn't breathe other people's air, right? So I just want to say, don't lick surfaces in general, but yeah, I know I may have confused you about that. Okay, so this is back in January 14, right? This is when there's sort of pictures coming out of China that there's sort of something is going on. It's not great. Maybe it's, how bad is this? Right, no evidence of human-to-human transmission. Right, so this is sort of the first big public thing. So I do not, I don't know what's going on the other side. I mean, maybe this is just a genuinely true thing, but it's a bit perilous to even say anything, I think, at this point, because surely you don't really know. We're not seeing airborne transmission. This is March 30, right? This is the NBA's, gone down. Rudy Gobert has sneezed on his fellow players and been right. He did a whole douchebag thing where he went and licked the microphones and was kind of like, ha ha ha. It's so funny. Anyway, he did a service, I suppose. Yeah.
I just don't understand all these scientists ran models and then tried it with aerosols versus water droplets, and we're not seeing anything even close to the spread with water droplets in the models as they were with airborne stuff.
You mean people?
Yeah, people were trying with they want to know which ones. They're trying with airborne. They're trying with aerosols and trying with water droplets, and they're trying with water droplets. Simulations never look like what we would see in real life.
I don't know. I don't understand at all. I mean, there were simply accidental experiments. Like there's a coffee shop in Korea, right? And they had the ventilation pattern, and the people who were sitting in where the air was going tended to get it. The people who were wearing masks behind the counter didn't. I really don't understand. I don't understand. It was obviously about breathing, but we didn't know in the first few months, right? Everything was hot lava. Humans were hot lava. Floor was hot, everything was hot lava, and you had to wear gloves, and you kind of, there's Lysol all over everything, and the dog, and all over your oranges and whatever, and it's just like, yeah, no, that's right. All of your food, the broccoli. New York Times just had an article that it's okay to eat stickers. I mean, I don't understand what's going on with that paper, by the way, but they just had a whole long piece of yeah, it's okay to eat the stickers. It won't hurt you. Thank you for that. Yeah. I thought there's a New York Times pitch bot on Twitter, which is fun to follow, which is these kind of headline things, which it can be hard to distinguish. And I thought that one was a pitch bot joke, but it's actually an article. Anyway, so no, I don't know. I think there's been a pretty big. There's a lot of stuff with mathematical epidemiologists saying we know everything, and they don't, and they didn't, and it was not a good time overall because scientists were like, let's listen to the scientists, but we're like, no, this is a really hard problem, and people don't, this is a mess. Disaster. One of my favorite words, actually. Bad star, right? So astrological ill fate. We're going to talk about fate in a couple of weeks. Pretty good. I mean, this is a good thing to try out, right? We've got a big clock up there, and if we can kind of connect that to things that happen here, by story at least, then we're pretty set. I'll have this too, but fate, that word is sort of the past tense for written. It's written. It's been written down. It's like foretold. Fame is to talk. Fame is alive and being talked about. It truly kind of encodes etymologically the idea of fame, which is simply being talked about. So the stars and planets are apparently the shadowy cabal in this case, right? They're running the show, which is pretty difficult because there are going to be other planets elsewhere, so they have to have the same, like they have to have they project in that way. It was tricky, yeah. Mind you, that was also not something you could say. I think it was, it's terrible. I've forgotten his name off the top of my head, but an Italian scientist or thinker 400 years ago who said that all those stars are suns and they have planets and they'll probably have life around them. He was promptly burnt to death. So there's a statue where that happened, and he's pointing towards. I feel terrible. I can't get his delusional. Pointing towards the Vatican defiantly. Bruno. Yeah, I recommend visiting it. Different to Galileo, who said, "Yeah, by the way, I kind of made that wasn't true. Yeah. Kind of did not get taken out." Yeah, fate is sometimes food. There's a fair amount of fate. We've talked about universality. Yeah, so we'll get to that. These are actually from my journals. I have extensive journals going back to the 90s, and which will not be of value to read to anyone, but it's kind of a day one. I'm going to recommend day one if you use the Mac system. Day one is fantastic, but all my old ones are in LaTeX and in Emacs. Anyway, so this is this is me just writing stuff. I don't know it, like I'm just like exploding, uselessly tweeting. Like this is right. This is. I guess I wrote this. Just a mess, right? This is I'm writing to Scarpino, who's a colleague of mine. Studying pandemics need to be able to present some kind of numbers. It's been waiting to happen because people have been lazily having fun with math models. I'm concerned about how to communicate vital scientific stupid. Maybe a radar plot visualization. I don't know. And the point of this was like, there are lots of different things that, thresholds that you might cross in terms of why something is exploding. And it shouldn't be just one number, which we talked about earlier on, right? Don't measure things with one number. You're right. Measles has an R0 of 20. We should all have it. That's pretty bad. That's like exponential, boop, we've all got it. Anyway, so there's no time scale. I guess I added an adjective, but I will be absolutely honest. My native language is basically all swearing. So if you've ever watched Trailer Park Boys, that is pretty much the most authentic. Yeah. Because there's swearing in shows or whatever and stuff, and it's like, okay, you wrote that, but then there's just true organic cursing. Anyway, so I'm sorry. I can manage myself, I suppose. But I mean, it helps you get to a point very quickly. One of the core pieces we had, right? What is N, right? And I've showed you this work, right? Rare event, right? I keep seeing your countries report their first case. This was a terrible business. South Korea was doing very well, but then there was an outbreak in a church because one person turned up, and hundreds of people got infected. They had some nightclub debacles as well. Yeah. So what is happening? This is. And I told you this verbally the other day, but I'll just write it down. This is kind of ridiculous. Hanks and Rita Wilson, so they announced this within about 15 minutes. NBA just yanks it, right? On hold, Trump gives an Oval Office address, and the Dow Jones goes down during it, pretty much. It's the first time complicated thing, and I'm not going to say anything about it, but, he was definitely trying to fight the pandemic with a story, right? To him, he's a storyteller, and this is my view, and he's a storyteller, and that's his skill set. And he was kind of trying to, make it, that's not so bad, right? There are only 15 cases, and they're all going to go away. I mean, I don't think he thought that at all, right? But he was sort of just trying to say it's okay, it's going to be okay, because these things can go away, right? They can go away. I mean, SARS totally didn't really get past, well, we think maybe 1,000, but maybe 10,000. So he kind of hedged on that one. But in this one, this is where he started to say, it's not great, right? There's some badness happening. And the Dow Jones, the futures just kind of linearly went down during the speech from the first minute. And I think I've said this, right? But there's Sarah Palin was on the Masked Singer performing So Mix-a-Lot's Baby got back in a bear costume. That was all happening at the same time. So it really depended on which channel you were watching. And I have this in a paper, actually. Because I think this points to like how hard it is to make sense of history, right? What do you record and what do you forget? And we have work on computational timelines. That's in Pox Volume 2, but yeah.
At the same time, wasn't Italy like in a complete lockdown?
Oh yeah, no, Italy is on fire, and we're like, Italy, oh no, because they don't put all their old people together, right? They live, just generally as a culture, right? People live with their families. So you had the asymptomatic spreading. So you had this kind of terrible disaster happening there where people who were young and healthy and seemingly fine brought it into the household. And that's how that seemed to be working early on.
All this is happening is there's footage of like people in hazmat suits that's
No,
spraying down.
what else do you need? It's just incredible because we've had China. This looks bad. And now it's in Iran and Italy. That's really bad. That's really bad. It's really bad. That it's in two different places, right? That they're quite different. They obviously, everyone's connected to everyone, so they have connections to China of some degree. But it's like this is terrible, and all the other places where it's happening, it's not being measured. Early on, I think there was I tweeted something like the case, once it's sort of taken off, the numbers of infected people in Iceland were greater than those recorded by India and Russia, and you're like. Probably not true, right? Because Iceland's got a long history of like shutting it down and making funny videos about Mark Zuckerberg and stuff when they're chilling out. But they just that's a very clear thing for them. So yeah, no, I don't. That was unbelievable. That was just unbelievable to watch. We're sort of screaming about this, and then once it's like, oh, it's all through Washington State. I'm like, well, yeah. And it was actually a long time after, and I'm not sure you'll have individual stories, but I sort of found out there was a lot of people in Burlington had it in March and April. Many recovered. Our neighbor's father died. She probably gave it to him. But people had no idea. And we could have been. It's always confusing at the start of these things. But the basic, everything is lava approach, not bad, right? Wear masks. Yeah. Which again, Asia had done for a long time. I remember visiting Seoul and Tokyo in 2013 for conference stuff, and just a lot of people, just in general, right? We know that, and you sort of know that, but it was a stark contrast. You come back to the U.S., and people just didn't, they just weren't worried. It wasn't. Yes, well, it just wasn't. SARS had been a bigger concern there, and bird flu. Lots of things kind of spread locally there. Anyway, so this is some other stuff. They look like us now. That's a TV trope, right? So I'm trying to figure out how to turn the TV trope archive into something that we can partition stories, right? Decompose stories into. If we can do that, we'll have solved, this will be kind of an unbelievable thing. There's Fourier for sound and wavelets for images, and I think TV tropes for stories, right? Okay. So you got to test everyone. This was just abysmal, and it just left us. We had no idea, and the excess death thing, that became like, okay, we can't test. Let's at least know how many people are dying, and then you can sort of have a picture of things. But that took 6-7 months before there were even dashboards about that at all. And I've shown them to you probably ad nauseum, but they're still just manifestly out of date, right? That just depends on the country and the region. Right, so you need sunlight, and there was this became politicized, right? More testing meant more cases, and that's not right. And just shut up and test people. And we needed to be prepared, and we just really were not. And we'll probably be prepared 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, but not 100 years from now, maybe. So I have this kind of conception of narrative epidemiology. More, I have this thing about stories, more, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but there's more and more sort of kind of, I think, framing around stories that you're seeing in different areas. There's narrative economics. Schiller came up with that. the idea that the economy sort of runs on code, that kind of framing. And I really liked seeing that kind of framing. It's not social, it's not physics or something like that, but rather that it's algorithms and code, and that goes back thousands of years. So the virus, if we go through TV tropes, right? So it's the big bad, which is sort of this, because TV tropes, if you haven't seen the site, just play around with it, endlessly kind of enjoyable. But you can mix around, you'll find like, here's a thing that happens, right, in stories a lot. So it's a trope. And then it's a community that's curated examples in stories. And it actually started from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, right? That was the motivation early on. It's like, okay, Buffy's full of stories and messing with stories and playing with stories. And it's the greatest TV show ever. And so personal opinion. And then that was it sort of spawned this whole thing. And then so now there's literature is tagged and points to reality to some extent. In terms of a big bad, right? So it's the overarching villain of the season. And then, but in this case, it's a complete monster, right? It's not redeemable. Like the virus is not going to come around and say, hey, I take its mask off and say you are my son or something. Like it's not going to have some sort of story ending like that. It's just a remorseless photocopying machine, basically. And we're the participants. Anyway, there are lots of tropes. You click on these and look at them. Ignore the scientists, right? What do they know? That's very common in it. So think about TV or movies, right? That happens a lot. What do the scientists know? The asymptomatic spreaders, which seem to be a nasty part of it. The virus looks like us now, right? So we were just, basically we are the soldiers of this thing. Failure to act as one against a remorseless foe, right? So let's split up. Classic trope in horror movies, right? Which is played with, but that happens all the time. And in some ways, the U.S., which because it's this balkanized structure of federated states, has a lot of this, fantastic conception, right? There's a lot of merit to doing that. You get a lot of it's John Stewart's idea. It's the meth labs of democracy, right? So. Anyway, so that helps with a lot of things. But once you need to unify, and if you can't do it, you're going to be in trouble. And we certainly weren't able to do it in the U.S. collectively, and then kind of collectively as a world, no, right? And I don't know. I mean, if you're a first world country like sort of developed nation, then you should be thinking, ideally, you'd be like, well, let's vaccinate everyone. It just helps. We don't, even if you're just a big selfish monster, let's make sure this thing is, goes away, because, now we get into reverberations in the supply chain. So the toys for Christmas are, it's starting to hurt people a little bit in a different way. Vaccine is a silver bullet. There's a whole bunch of stuff about magic potions and, the sort of the search for the cure. These are story tropes, right? Poison and cure gambit. That's, like, we're going to put the poison in and then we'll give you the cure and then we'll do something bad. It's like all the big cabal thing. This is the Bill Gates story. The idea that a tyrant will take the helm, this sort of fear that if you allow, the government to control things, it's going to be. So there are lots of tropes, I think, that can be kind of pulled out. None of this is, this is just by hand. There's nothing automatic about this. I don't know how to do that. This is a big problem over and over again for us trying to understand systems and just, everything is that we will try to tell stories about individuals all the time. So there's a earthquake somewhere, and if it's written up in some way, it'll be like, X, got up that morning and went to work, and it's like traces it through. Then there's some maybe bigger pieces, and it traces back in, and maybe somebody, sermons work like this in churches. There are lots, storytellers do this over and over again. I remember seeing, what's his name? What is it called? American Life. What's the podcast thing? This American Life? I guess not that American. Ira Glass, right? So he was here at the Flynn years ago and was giving this kind of thing about storytelling and how he did a lot of editing, I guess, for years, maybe a decade. He was sort of behind the scenes guy. And then eventually realized that, you tell a story about an individual, then you generalize, and then you go back to that individual thing. So you hang it around. And And then, he was excited about this discovery of his, and then he talked to a friend who was a religious leader of some sort. He said, "Yeah, well, that's what we've been doing for thousands of years. This is basic. This is right. Well done." Anyway, so it works for our brains, but it doesn't mean we understand. Like we can really get into trouble trying to think about systems. So that's why, like I don't want a vaccine. It's me, individual, like safety, blah blah blah. Is a very sensible thing to grasp onto. But it's much harder to think about a thing spreading through hundreds of millions of people and how you might stop it. You need simple stories, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, this is about Trump, I suppose, but yeah, this is January 18, right? They were really worried about this back then, but they couldn't get through it and they couldn't really talk about it. Just wouldn't connect. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, they were worried about it. People were worried about it. People were trying to voice this, and it just wasn't connecting. And I mean, there's a wishful thinking. You don't want this to happen, right? So it's not happening. Anyway, mismeasurement of death. I've talked about this, right? So the dashboards are kind of wrong. There are no error bars. You see like 8, 9 significant digits where it's just like, this is how many people are dead or alive or whatever. It's kind of remarkable. It's like flying a plane. I've got readings from 3 hours ago. I talked about the grim scorekeeper. Excess deaths, well, depends where we are now, but they're much higher than what we've had. Maybe 500,000 deaths by just, the end of last year. For the US, it's getting close to 1 million probably now. It looks like it will go over 1 million excess deaths by the time this thing, because the winter is coming, which is apparently a thing. This was a dashboard that everyone got excited about early on, but it just didn't really help. I think it's misleading. I mean, cases. Look at this. This is 8 significant digits. Like, I don't know. Like maybe, and then the deaths. Right? There's huge error bars on here, and the errors went upwards. Better efforts, right? It's beautiful, but it's misleading. It's about cases. This is death tolls actually. And the problem with this one is, of course, that it's reported deaths, right? So from COVID, which some countries didn't want to report. Russia didn't really report. I mean, they reported excess deaths, but they didn't report COVID properly. And it's also just a hard thing to capture. This is early on. So this is actually September 20 last year. So what are we talking like? January is when we first saw it, but March is really when we start to get a sense that it's, it really is, and people are dying and there are terrible things happening. So this is a long time after the New York Times starts to produce these excess death plots. What's wrong? Is it bad? What?
I was just saying March 15th is my birthday. It was like the day.
If that's the right, wasn't there a 50% chance? Well, yeah. Although it was anchored, which changes it, right? Because you said your birthday. Yeah. What is it? Just like 20 people, and there's like a 50-50 chance that 2 of them will have the same birthday. And yeah, your brain can't work it out. Yeah. I have rarely met people born on my birthday. I don't know why that is. It's very strange. Right? Anyway, but yeah. Yeah. You have to think about what was. So I have an uncle and aunt who are twins who were born on February 29th, and they've had this. Well, I guess they've had their 18th birthday now. Yeah, they did the whole thing like that. Yeah. The zeroth of March. All right, so there's this. This is again the Financial Times. They're doing a good job. I think The Economist has really done the best part of it. This is last year, but it's very poignant for right now because this is this is into January 10 of this year, and the problem is we're going to get not random mixing, but we're going to get a big mixing dose, right? Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. People are even more fatigued about this. The people who don't want to get vaccinated really don't want to get vaccinated. So, and there's a sort of mixing, those people might be more connected together. So, I mean, surely it can't be as bad as last winter, but the problem is, we will introduce people to each other. And, you know. But again, I don't know. Maybe people will just be, because of last year, be more careful. That it's, as we've said, hard to predict how people will behave. But there's a lot of fatigue in this thing, and yeah. So, okay, that's probably so. It's just a bit of a scratchy thing I have here, and I don't know what to do with it. All right. So this is long. We'll get through some of it. And what's going to connect into is just a simple spreading model that's social in nature. It's kind of the equivalent of the SIR model, like it's sort of the the fruit fly model to look at. Just like all of these things, like the rich get richer model. It's a simple model. You can understand what's going on, and it gives rise to behaviors that again we wouldn't kind of get out of our heads through simple stories, right? They're things that we have to simulate and say, oh, there's this weird group thing that happens, and that's important. Now we have it in our brain, right? So if you're a fan of linear algebra, right, it's sort of like left null space, right? So the stories of systems are they just go past us. They don't sit in our heads. So we have to really think about them and kind of find out ways to kind of encode them and talk about them. I mean, it's interesting. We do have some big examples in, the world of where people behave collectively, like sports teams and so on, and we can kind of wrap our heads around that. There are governments we tend not to kind of like or talk about them in very good ways. There's sort of, what is the rating for Congress now? About 10% or something. Like everyone just sort of hates it because it's sort of this big amorphous blob. Anyway, okay. Social contagion. Yes, I got that when I was in grade 6, and I was very excited. Okay, so I was going to show you. We've talked about baby names before, and you played around with it, but this is the geographic version of it. So I was just sort of going to page through this particular kind of social contagion, which this is sort of in some ways the first big data set that social scientists would one of them. There would people to be able to play around with and kind of explore and look for patterns. And one of the things that happens as you go through here is you start to see, well, of course, changing demographics. There's also just the cohesion of say the U.S. in this case, and we have right, and then yeah. Then there's some work on like socioeconomic aspects, right? So that the names that the super well-to-do start to use are not common, right? They start to sort of infuse and they trickle down. There's the effects of celebrities and so on, right? There's all sorts of patterns to play around with. Anyway, but back here, David is ascendant. Robert is sort of going away, but you see it's quite regional. This is the most common name, right? So there's a zip distribution for each name in each state. This is the most common name in each state for that year. So not a lot of diversity, I think, is something to point out. And there are clubs. I remember reading years ago, I think when I was in Australia, there were like clubs of Michaels, because they were just sort of banded together because every second person was called, I don't know. So you see Michael sort of going up. It's really, boom, this is 65. David sort of fights back. It's very territorial. But, David's going to be like second or third, right? James is starting to really get into trouble. Let's get to 970. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, how would you calculate diversity for that kind of data set? Would you just take like the first rank and look at it, or because I know?
Yeah. Yeah. So the rank turbulence thing, right, does this at a pairwise, right? Yeah. But it would be the generalization would be to this, and it would be fantastic. I think we could do it. Okay. I thought about that as a future thing, but it would be super interesting to do. I mean, there are some.
Because is it like more diverse than in Canada, say, or back in the days? I know that the Roman apparently like they were like all the same names, or like in other countries where they will have like if you're the firstborn, it will be like Mohammed and whatever,
right.
This kind of stuff. Like for us, it's not that anymore because we're not the son of, but
the son of was so bad. It's so bad.
I mean,
Sorry.
it's still more diverse than 100 years ago, but I don't know where
Right. No, it's really interesting. I think one thing that's well, so what we'd have down to is the 5 at the end, right? Like so the counts have to be at least 5 for it to be in the data set. Pretty rich. You can estimate that tail a little bit because we have the total number of babies born. So you can kind of get an estimate of what the 4, 3, 2, 1s are. Not the number. It'd be great to have the number. Like how many unique names are there? We couldn't do the comparison exactly categorically, but just that, like how big is that tail getting? Um, I think it's doable, and I think it'd be really super interesting. I mean, this is just the superficial thing at the top. Yeah, yeah, and it's useful, but it'd be really. I'd love to get that to work.
That will be interesting also because it transferred to other kind of control stuff.
Yeah.
That's hard to measure because we don't have like sensory or anything.
Yeah.
It's not,
Yeah. No, it's really good. I think. So there's an issue with, of course, population numbers. So you'd have to play around with that a little bit, right? Because they're highly variable. Maybe you sort of do something regional. I don't. But even just say having 3 different zip distributions and getting a number out for the diversity of that thing would be awesome, right? So I think it's doable. I got to tell you, I mean, the rank turbulence, that was like like 1,000 hours of work, into a lot of these things. I mean, I'm a completely insane human being, but it's just like absolutely obsessive madness, right? And so, but of course, you see it now. It's like, well, it's a thing. It's not that big. But I think we could do it, and it totally makes sense that that's possible. Yeah. So let's go. That's a great question. So there's 970. So we saw David sort of fights back there and the knowledge of places, right? Utah. Jason, yes, that's a good 70s name. The little invasion maybe from Canada, right? Yes, the Canadians have come over the border. Right, no, I know. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so there's no, right. There's going to be some French names up here, of course, right? Because they're French speaking,
So often, Christian, that will be like the French.
There are a lot of Chris's at some point, I think. But my name is totally dead by this point. My middle name Sheridan means forest man or something. Like it's supposed to be so I don't mind it actually. So but it became a female name actually as I was growing up. So I only ever met Sheridans who were it just got reinterpreted, I suppose. My wife's last name is Peaky, which is woodpeckers in Italian, and so the girls have willow and linden. So there's kind of a forest tree theme for their middle names. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Very small touch. But there's Jason is continuing to invade, right? The Canadians are coming down. Yeah, I mean, there's only comedy in the U.S. because of Canada, by the way. So there's also Jason. Jason, it's also a product of Canada. Right, it's good. I'm speculating. Who knows? But if we have the top, yeah, we need to put the hat. We need to put the sensible hat of Canada on top and have its data set as well. Which should be doable, right? I mean, the Canadians would have good records, yeah? But you see Michael's attached over here. I mean, there's a lot of Michaels, right? There's a lot. And it's a zip distribution, It's not just like number 1. It's number 1, and then it really drops away. How else we go? We've got James. This is 1977. Really not. And you'll see this, the female names as well. You'll see this. So Matthew pops up. So we're getting a little bit of that. 82. Michael is still there. So Chris has really started they're like, okay, we'll call him Chris. But Michael is just fighting. This is amazing. Territorial version of this is incredible. This is why you sort of need the overall list and the maps, right? And then, boom, Tyler appears. Was there a Tyler before? When did Tyler come? See, North Dakota, it's all happening in North Dakota. It's like, this is where all the old coolness and fads come from. This is a speculation, right? What's that?
It's easier to sway the.
Oh, you're saying the cabal injected the name Tyler in here? Tyler. There's sort of there's an old story, like an old short story in Australia where things go wrong. It's called a bush christening. Things are going kind of not so good. I think it's the baby needs to be christened, and the reverend or whatever is struggling and forgets everything and has a bottle of whiskey or whatever and just uses that name at some point. So you can imagine some some manipulations. Well, I like it. I like what's the conspiracy theory for Tyler? Anyway, Tyler really takes off. It's kind of incredible. This William, because we've never had William before. Um, you will see some kind of variation eventually, Jacob, but none of these. So this is a big change, right? This is a big change, and I think that is, yeah. So it's 96, and it sort of stays, yeah. So it becomes durable. But what you realize, because you can't, it's a hard thing to show, right? Jose's probably been number 10 or something, like in the years before, and so you don't. So it's sort of a shock. Um, okay, just really not letting go on the Jacob. What's that?
California has been Daniel for a while now.
Wow.
They just don't care.
Wow. But they're not like North Dakota matters more than, I'm just totally making this up. But right? No one is saying yes to Daniel.
No, thank you.
Nevada's like, sure. Ethan's, and I think we get to about 2010. I mean, this is a pretty weird social contagion story, right? I mean, you could break it down by counties and do all sorts of things. This is another change here, I think. And this is William. Let's go back to William, which was the number one name in 1880. And Liam, of course, has become a big name, but Liam is it's actually an Irish shortening of William, which then spread back out to the English-speaking world. Wow, Daniel is amazing. It feels like that's a glitch. It feels like they got the data wrong. Like, really? Okay. So this is true. You will experience this. Yeah. Right. Right. So my youngest one is Charlotte, which is a common name in Australia and England, but there were no Charlottes, so we thought, it's a classic name, but no one uses this name. But now it's top 10 for the last 10 years. They've got a cousin called Ava, top 10 for years. So we have a Sophie, which is not Sophia, but all the variations, right? Yeah. Give them special names so it doesn't work. It's a very strange thing to do. Like, what do you, right? Like, you're naming a kid. And the U.S. has had a lot more innovation in the last 20 years, right? People really, and people just have truly unique names. There's the name Unique, which isn't unique. There are lots of people called Unique every year. So I don't mean that kind of name, but really wholesale creations. And I think, sort of to your point before, Germany, I think, it may still be true, and I know some other European countries, there's a list of names you can call your kid, and that's it. Here's a menu. That's it. You can't call them, lawnmower or something, or reality. What's that?
We have in Montreal, for say, there is a big community of Asian people, right? And they'll try to pick names that they think make sense for us, but they got it wrong. But then, there's been
So it's like
almost like Germany. You'll have no, you can't call your children spoon. It's you can't do it, and they're like, why?
So there is a rule. It is.
It's in court. There's no.
Oh, I see. I wonder what France might be more, because Quebec is very, got sort of threw off the shackles of religion and in very interesting ways. The swear words you have are the best.
Yeah.
Primo. Yeah. They're just elements from a church, right? They're not particularly. Yeah.
Because they always can swear.
No one knows what he says. But it's basically like saying table and chair. I mean, they're not, they don't have any. Right.
Like a tabernacle.
Yeah, it's like.
French people make
Yeah, right. It's very good. I like it a lot. Yeah. There was a
couple in Sweden, I think, at some point that tried to put an at symbol in their child's name, and the government had to go to court to fight them.
And they couldn't do it, right?
They ended up not being. They had to change the name.
Elon Musk, our favorite idiot. What a deplorable human being. What was it? So it was no, what is it again? Hash? Oh, God, right. Yeah. Well, we'll be able to afford be able to afford the therapy and probably their own set of bullies, like it's like, or school.
You gotta be like sophisticated to make fun of that, right?
That's usually where you don't have to do anything. Like it's already done, right? You just call them by that name, and that's it. That's it. Okay, so I don't know. It's fun to kind of go through. I just this is just amazing to look at. But Daniel, by the way, good spot. Daniel, years, and then Jacob, which has been lurking. Jacob is like the monster that you think has gone away, right? Like it's end of the movie, you think it's dead, but then sort of pops back up and makes an assault on the West Coast. So it's been lurking.
Is California is less religious? I don't know that.
It's it's funny. It's strongly democratic, but it's got a really strong right side, of libertarians and people who feel who moved to here instead because it's not so yeah. Our Musk friend, obviously a made up name. Oh, my thesis for that. I told you this, right? Like Elon Musk is clearly an alien. Have I mentioned this? Oh, it's very, very clear. So there's Bezos is obviously as well, Bill Gates and Zuckerberg. So, they were stranded here for some reason. They're probably like janitors on ships or whatever. And Musk is trying to harness the local, through sort of some religious experience, like to harness the local industry to build a spaceship to get back. Bezos clearly wants to get back home as well. Zuckerberg decided to stay and take over. So that was a different approach. Gates is sort of like trying to actually help a little bit, but anyway, we'll see. He's done some things that aren't great, of course. But yeah, interesting. I mean, it's a big tell. Yeah, right. That name, the kid's name. I mean, it's very. I mean, how much do you need? Yeah. All right. Zuckerberg. I mean, obviously, not a human, right? Like, yeah.
Bill Gates' kids are normal.
Oh yeah, yeah. They have very nice horses. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Noah, the traditional Hawaiian name Noah. Okay. So, we got one more. I think we get to just 2012. Okay, Jacob. So, yeah. No, this was good. Look, 2012. Liam and William. These are the same name. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm gonna do this. Well, it's just the way it works. Is it okay? We're gonna do it. Sorry, we're having fun. You've got Thanksgiving coming up, and yeah, it'll be really interesting to this for other countries for sure. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. for all its madness always presents a very interesting thing to look at because of these states, right? It's always just this, yeah, rich enough object in itself. So Mary for maybe 50, 60 years was the number one name in the U.S., right? I mean, sort of through the allotaxonometry stuff, absolutely dominant. So this is a religious thing. We see some new ones coming in. Susans. You probably didn't go to school with Susans or Marys. No Susans. No. Some Lisas over here and Julie's, and then Karen, right? So which I mean, I think that is terrible. Of course, it's like the Karen thing. Just oh dear, the naming out. I mean, lots of nice people called Karen. Anyway, Lisa makes a play here. Brenda is like, can I do it? Lori, which is pretty old back there, and Vermont's bought into the Lisa thing. This is all Lisa up here. Susan's. But you'll see that kind of stays for a while, I think, 60s, Lisa, which is Elizabeth, right? So Elizabeth has got Liza, Betty, Beth, all those names. And Elizabeth is that core name for a different, there's nothing like it in male names or female names that just stays kind of top 20, just really durable, even when there's all this other turnover.
I feel like you expect names to at least try to be not all the same as like connectivity increases, right? Because people maybe try to be more unique, but I think we didn't see that.
No, humans, just doing the humaning thing. I mean, so you're right. I mean, some people are going to really disambiguate and really give their names some different, kids some different names. There's some guy who had his kids were called, I think, Winner and Loser, I think, which was just an experiment to see what would happen. Terrible. So no, there you go. So we didn't have this for boys' names. So this is like, boom. pops back to Mary. Lisa's presumably 2. Michelle, there we go. Makes a play. There's an Angela. Kimberly, boom. So, 973, 974, 975, 976, 977, 978, 979. Oh, some Amandas. Well, it's just incredible, you know, and I mean, that's why we have Jennifer Aniston. I mean, all these, you know, there are other reasons for why she exists, but you know, like, that's why she has that name. It's almost unavoidable. She could have been Amanda Aniston, but no. So Jessica, which of course is just basically the same name. It's sort of like, it's not really, it's not adventurous, right? Like, it's basically the same name. So Jessica appears in Alaska and Vermont and Maine at this point. And we'll get a bit of a go, right? Amanda is being, beaten back. But now it's Jennifer and Jessica. Basically, so I think we start to get a little bit of lift out of it. But again, even less diversity, I think, here. I think in general, boys have a less diverse set of names, but in terms of the top, wow. I mean, all of this is pointing to the fact that the really basic feature of humans is we imitate each other, right? And we also don't think we do it, which makes us super dangerous and crazy collectively, because we're like, no, I'm my own individual person, yet I have the accent of everyone around me, and I buy the same clothes and all. But that's not true. I did that all by myself,
I mean, it's especially weird in North America. For instance, like, it used to be different. Like, we don't believe that we're that special. And, like, in North America, we firmly believe that we're all special.
Right.
Community.
I know it was buried in this ridiculous things I heard, but the Jeff Winger line when he says nobody's special, that's a very poignant little piece in that zombie thing. Anyway, so there's this. So we've got to Jessica. I mean, it's really not. Wow, this is 1990 still. And the Jennifer Jessica thing is basically 20 years now. Ashley is just enormous, and I have it in one of the papers about this. There's also just so for boys, there's Aiden, Baden. I know I said this, but there's XZ Aiden, like Zayden, Sladen. There's every kind of Aiden you want, like with an AY or an AI or a DENN. It is amazing. So even in that sense, like, we're being creative, right? But they're all the same, right? Aiden's the core one, and they're just Madison's, Brittany's, lots of different Brittany. You go to the top 1,000, and there'll be like 5 different Brittany's, which look like misspellings at the bottom, right? Like, but aren't really. Oh, there's a Brittany. There was a Brittany. West Virginia. Excellent. No, did I get that right? No, is that yes? Everyone knows their U.S. geography really well, right? Yeah, good. I remember coming to the U.S. and meeting students who just didn't know where anything was, and I'm like, this is your country. And I mean, you're very aware of the world if you live in a place like Australia. Like, you really are, because the maps, like, there's everywhere else, and we just have one country. It's not very interesting. And six states, basically, which are named things like Western Australia. I mean, just clearly gave up. South Australia. I need to mention this too. So, right, so this thing here, like, this is Western Australia. That's a state. And then South Australia is here. That's huge. And then there are just 3 states on this side. This is Victoria. I'm from about here. And this is the Northern Territory, Tasmania, and there's a little pretend state in here called the Australian Capital Territory, like Washington, where they put isolate the politicians. It's also the center of the porn industry in Australia. So that's an interesting. Always a sort of curious thing about Canberra. But some of these are states, and they're not. But this one. So the thing is, do you know how big this thing is? What's that? Well, it's big. It's very flat. No, some mountains here. That's why it's dry in the middle. It's old. There are no river structures. It's the same size as the 48 states.
I actually worked in Darwin, and I thought I would hitchhike all the way to Townsville, and then I realized it was like 2,000 kilometers.
You could do it. You might be on the back of a sheep track or something like that. But you,
Like I didn't realize there was like there's a lot of
yeah, yeah. This part through here is called the nullarbor, which is Latin actually for no trees. You drive through here on a straight road. I mean, even that. Right, that's exactly right. So Indonesia's up here. And Perth is here, and there's really about 1 million people, and this is about a third of the U.S. The 48 states. On the maps that I grew up with, the equator was 2/3 of the way down the page because thank you England, and it made Europe look huge, and we're like, oh wait, that was small, and Greenland was 3 times as big as Australia. It's the other way around. I don't know how we had that map. What a political.
colonization.
I know. Yeah, no, it's like you convicts or whatever we think of you. Yeah.
The United States is 8.1 million square miles.
Yeah. People always have this thing where they put them on top. Yeah.
We, for a second, we were like, wait, is this talking about South Australia alone?
No, fair enough. Okay, that's good. Yeah, so Texas is big. Of course, Alaska is big. Canada really should report that. But this is a big state. Yeah. So there was a flash out here in the 80s, which was thought potentially could have been a nuclear bomb set off by a Japanese cult, the ones that did bad things in a subway. And the truck drivers saw it, and they're like, but the story was it probably didn't happen. But the story was maybe. This is like 1,000 miles to kind of anyone, so it's sort of conceivable.
Let's say that if a tree falls, somebody could hear it. Does it make a sound?
Well, I'm going to say yes, but yeah, but you're right. This is definitely a long way away from peoples. Yeah, of course, Aboriginal people spread through all of here, and it's really, the population density is very, very low because it's just a very difficult country to live in. Friends of mine from boarding school worked here in a reservation with Aboriginal people, and Australia's history, of course, is terrible. But they named their first daughter after a woman who was part of a group who walked out of the Western Australian desert in the 1980s and had never had contact with white people. So in the 1980s, there was still, which is true. Now we sort of try to uncontacted people. Like in the Amazon and so on, we try to keep away from them. I'm sure there are influencers trying to freaking get in there all the time, but we have a sense like let's keep away. But this was just like no one knew. It wasn't like the 80s that weren't good. Australia wasn't behaving well in some way. Yeah, no, it's a forbidding country. So, and I'm from the edge of on farmland from the edge of a desert. Yeah, it just disappears into scrub. So, okay, Emily, 98. So Emily's the dominant one. And I think we'll see some changes here. Maybe not. So there's Maya, yeah. Isabella, I think Isabella sort of becomes a name down there. Well, okay, so it's not necessarily yep. So it's with an E. It's different. Oh well. Yeah. So there we go. Okay. So wow, that was. It's just I don't know. It's super enjoyable. This was actually a GIF, like a GIF thing that I unpacked and made into a set of slides, which I thought was fun. So social phenomena, right? I have a few. All right.
Because of the success.
Where's the? Wow, really? Maybe there's no. Well, that's. All right, let me see.
Because of the success of science.
Feynman, who is, not a great human being, but whatever. Is it this? Wow. This is way too much.
Because of the success of science, there is a kind of I think, a kind of pseudoscience that social science is an example of science, which is not science.
So rude.
They don't do science. They follow the form. You gather data, you do so and so on and so forth, but they don't get any laws. They haven't found that. They haven't gone anywhere yet. Maybe someday they will.
Okay, you did say that.
And what happens is, at an even more mundane level, we get experts on everything. It sounds like they're sort of scientific expert. They're not scientific. They sit at a typewriter and they make up something like, food grown with fertilizer that's organic is better for you than food grown with fertilizer that's inorganic. May be true, may not be true, but it hasn't been demonstrated one way or the other. But they'll sit there on a typewriter and make up all this stuff as if it's science, and then become an expert on foods, organic foods, and so on. There's all kinds of myths and pseudoscience all over the place. Now, I might be quite wrong. Maybe they do know all this thing. But I don't think I must have the advantage of having found out how hard it is to get to really know something. How careful you have to be about checking the experiments. How easy it is to make mistakes and fool yourself. I know what it means to know something. And therefore, I see how they get their information. And I can't believe that they know it. They haven't done the work necessary, haven't done the checks necessary, haven't done the care necessary. I have a great suspicion that they don't know that this stuff is, and they're intimidating people. I think so. I don't know the world very well. That's why.
So he's an obnoxious guy, but yeah, it was a no, just stretch. Anyway, that's a solid dig. Of course, physicists are running around talking about dark matter and dark energy like it's a real thing. So we'll see how that turns out. But I mean, in the history of science, it is hard to figure things out, and I think that, as I've said in this class, like measurement is paramount, and not the first human to ever think of that or say that. Of course, it's a basic stuff. Anyway, so he's obnoxious. So I guess his. Okay. So yeah. So that the physicist view, it still persists, right? If you find a true physicist or whatever, they'll be, or a pure mathematician, which probably should be called theoretical math. I think that would be better. They're giving the Slytherin thing away pretty straightforwardly. Then people still have this kind of regard. And of course, what you see then is the social scientists all think that the technical people are just technical, but they just do code. They don't think. They don't have ideas. So it's the identitarianism of disciplines remains this kind of shocking problem we have in science. But anyway, Feynman had a couple of hedges in there, right? Like he may be wrong, and like maybe we'll get there eventually, and I think we will, but it will be kind of at the level of like we can't predict the next 5 seconds kind of stuff, but we know that, right? And we managed to get that with weather, where we can say, okay, 2 weeks is sort of the upper limit, and it doesn't matter how much better our measurement gets, right? That's a colossal achievement scientifically, and it's not that we can't predict 4 weeks from now because we're missing theory, we're missing whatever. We understand that that's the limit. Yeah.
What do you think the feasibility of Harry Seldon like psychohistory kind of deal is?
Right. Which is, I mean, Asimov, what an absolute monster. Of course, I think that show is terrible, apparently, isn't it? I haven't watched it, but apparently it's a disaster. Yeah. Okay, for those who haven't, the Foundation series by Asimov, who wrote 500 books, was somehow a biophysics professor at BU, which obviously he sort of did a little bit, but not super well. Yeah, I mean, it's psychohistory, so Harry Seldon. So the idea is, you can kind of predict the long-term behavior of, in this case, empires, galactic empires, but populations at all scales, I suppose. And if you look at the way it's sort of framed, it's like StatMech. It's sort of like balls bouncing off each other, particles. We can kind of predict. It's sort of that gas theory. It has that feel to it. Look, people are very engaged in this. I mean, Facebook and so on, right? They're really trying. They're really, really, really trying to go as far as they can. So it won't be like that. But I don't know. Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I get the idea that you're like, well, the next year seems like it'll be pretty, like we may be able to do that. Like it's kind of going to tack along in this way for a while, but there's so many shocks that can happen in social systems that can just unfold things, and I think also now because of the, like you'd have to have this theory that evolved over time, right? Because the connectivity of the world now is so different to what it was 100 years ago. So George Floyd's murder has unbelievable reach, as it should, but did not 20 years ago, right? That wasn't being recorded. And the shock that led, created in the world. I don't know.
I think we saw a little bit of that with like Rodney King in the
Yeah,
early 2010s.
yeah, yep, yep. That was super powerful, and that was through the news outlets. Yep, for sure. That that feels like in history, definitely a transitional point, right? Where there's one story and it's horrible, it's recorded on video, and it's hard to dispute. Um, so, uh, so that, yeah, no, wow. Uh, so I think you could probably come up with some things about the fragility of a civilization, or a society, like given how things are right now, how much people are watching. Because I think there is this issue: people are watching each other, too connected. Things can just explode horribly as a result. I mean, I don't want to sort of. There's some argument for balkanization, like the hot model, right? It's just sort of like not everything is connected all the time, and it can stop the whole thing from exploding. So, there are efforts to measure that, right? So levels of like democracy, stability, right? People have these again, sort of single number kind of things. I mean, they're reasonable things to do. The stability of different countries, and sort of tracking that over time. Yeah, I don't know, but it's floating around everywhere. Yeah, and I think unfortunately, sort of the best minds of my generation, have gone off to places like, not the best minds, but a lot of good minds have gone there to work on how to sell ads to people. And I have a few friends who really greatly look back on that time, which for them was 2000, 2010, of like, not great, not great. What we did, clever problems to solve, da da da, not great. It has led to, it's these sort of algorithms running out of control to make money. So, yeah. I mean, what an incredible problem! Like, how do you set up the rule set for a society of 300 million people? I mean, how do you set up one 250 years ago, and then, or whatever it was, and then kind of with the intention that it would kind of just build organically and kind of work? And it's almost preposterous, right? Like, yeah.
Thomas Jefferson said that the whole Constitution should be rewritten every like 35 years. So.
Which was a good rule. I mean, that's a good rule. That's a good rule. I mean, Apple does it with their photos thing. Like it's kind of like it's I mean, obviously, yeah, but now it's entered into more of a, it becomes more of a religious belief kind of space, and that's not going to happen. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's an interesting rule set. Yeah. So I mean, I have all these things that I would go through, but this is just a sort of, I mean, in my work, I've been on this for 20 years, and we studied a lot of social contagion, and I'll show you some of these things, but social contagion models, thinking about, and the peril we sort of saw, I suppose, or the / interesting thing was, what can come of one seed in a network, and how does that vary as a function of the network and the contagion mechanism, and clearly this can be used for good and for bad. And I'll have this kind of idea of contagious stories, which sort of sums it all up. But BuzzFeed, I mean, I can't. So I worked with Duncan Watts for 6 years at Columbia in the social sciences, and Jonah Peretti he's good friends with Duncan. He would come to some of our meetings, and he's the guy who started this, right? So his sister, Chelsea Peretti, was on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is just an unnecessary connection for you. But they're sort of a comedic family, right? And Jonah Peretti was at Huffington Post, thing for him as well. You can look him up and see what's going on with him now, I suppose. But he was at the media lab at MIT, and he got into this whole contagion thing because he wanted to order from Nike some running shoes or whatever, and Nike had this thing you could put whatever you want on the side, right, like your name or whatever. Yeah. So he put in sweatshop. So he put in sweatshop, right? And he got this email saying, we can't, like, it's not swearing, but da-da-da, it's kind of some legal kind of stuff. And it's like, maybe choose another. And then so he writes back, and he's a funny guy. He writes back with some funny stuff. And then, there's more lawyer kind of stuff comes back. And this is a long time ago, right? This is in the 90s. So he ends up with a big email chain of, sort of ludicrous kind of, which is probably findable. He forwarded it to a few friends. Like, I'm a funny person. And look at the kind of fumbling that goes. And then that got, of course, this is back in the day. So people would forward that. And then, and around that time, we kind of started to get the sense, like, if someone from an aircraft carrier wrote to you saying that I saw your story, that's probably spread around the world. Like that was sort of an indication, like someone in Antarctica on a base is like, this is hilarious. So, and there was also the time where I guess he looked at his email. People would write to him all the time saying, I got it here. I'm a kid wherever or whatever. So he had this. It's kind of like going to the casino and, pulling the thing and winning straight away. So it's like, oh, I know how to spread stuff, right? And this, if you really figure out how to spread things, anything you want, then you have enormous power over the world, right? Advertising people try to do this forever. Good people in science trying to spread the Carl Sagan or whatever. People try to do this forever. People trying to control populations. It's really hard, and there's a defense side of this that I think we just remain terribly sort of behind on, which is just like, how do we try to understand how things are being spread, and how do we sort of say as a society defend ourselves against this? I mean, education helps, but the war front is basically people's minds. It's not a geographic thing. It's like really at home, and people have worried about this forever. In different ways with regard to stories, thousands of years really, but radio comes along, and then that's sort of injecting stories to people. TV comes along, it's injecting, and so that's an idea of you're at home and you're just getting this thing. But what's so pernicious about now, and we have it in our work, and we realize this early on, the thing that makes something really take hold in people is that it's coming through the social wild. Maybe you hear it from an authority, but you hear it from your friends, the culture around you does it, and that just makes it, in some cases, almost impossible to not adopt, right? So this is this idea of social proof, which I'll sort of go through at length. But, BuzzFeed was sort of founded on these sorts of things that we talked about years ago, which was, what makes things spread? And it's this lightweight, like jokes, right? The example we always have was jokes, right? They spread, people tell them, they retell them, you have no idea where they came from eventually, and they get kind of cleaned up and made, not cleaned up in terms of, they get sort of refined and made into a nice little package that can be spread, that preserves itself, right? It doesn't fall apart. And so that was sort of and it's still their framework. They had these little, pieces that were out of it. Like they were lightweight pieces that this is why people would forward things. And they were able to experiment early on with having different headlines. You could have 1,000 headlines for a story and just see which one spread, right? So now you can do this kind of testing that was completely impossible, beforehand. And then the other piece they added to this was news, right? BuzzFeed initially was just listicles and silliness, but news, they added really serious news, and they've had some pretty big pieces over the years, but was sort of ridiculed a bit early on. But the understanding was, what spreads? People talk about what's happening now for sure, and if it's allied to any of these dimensions, one or more of them, then spreadability goes up. All right, so they were good at this, right? This is a LOL, cute, fail, W2. This is just their error page back in the day. You're like, hey, it's fun. Lolcats. People spread. Anyway, well, tattoos. Enormous takeoff of tattoos, and of course religion here. But all right, so we'll come. I'll kind of come back to this. But there's a piece to. This is what I said at the start, I suppose, right? This is why things work so well for spreading with us, right? We all think we're special. Nobody's special. And we're like, I'm having my own conceptions. And all right, all right. I know I'm going slowly, but it's fun. All right, okay. All right, have a meaningful Thanksgiving in whatever way that is. And
Teams. There was a
I'm just going.